Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body, and yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is, there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest one or two kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order. Before we get started, I have a quick favor. I've been self-funding the Finding Genius podcast for 5 years now. I've done over 3,000 episodes. And as you can see on YouTube, we're up over 1 million views on the channel, which is fantastic. The next thing I really want to push on is to get up to 10,000 subscribers, because once we do, we'll be able to put a donate button, and we'll be able to solicit donations to help keep the podcast running and to also get the Finding Genius Foundation moving along. We have a big project studying anxiety, depression, and PTSD, and working on a product to help people overcome these problems, because I've seen them explode recently after the last 2 years of the whole virus situation. So if you would, please subscribe to the podcast. That would help us tremendously. Give us a thumbs up and check in the description for Buy Me a Coffee. It's about $5. If you could buy me a coffee, I'd really appreciate it. It would help keep the channel going, and I love coffee. Thank you.
Forget frequently asked questions,
common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation. My guest today is Luigi Gentile. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at BenchSci, BenchSci, like bench science, BenchSci. So we're going to talk about their patented machine learning technology that can read millions of data sources to create an amalgamation of that and show a picture or perhaps data visualization of what they see. I'll let Luigi describe that because he'll do it far better. So welcome, Luigi. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rich. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah.
If you would, tell me a bit about BenchSci and then, your position at it and, the work that BenchSci does.
Yeah, for sure. So BenchSci is a machine learning company where we help pharmaceutical companies and biotechs effectively understand evidence really well with a new degree of resolution to help design and execute more successful experiments. And the company was founded, I think, around 2017, and I joined in 2018, really to lead our commercial organization and build it on how we're working with the biggest biopharma in the world. And yeah, we began the company really with a very specific use case, which was, how do scientists find the right antibody for the experiment that they're working on, because we trained the machine to understand how every antibody's ever been employed in any experiment. And turned out that worked really well. That allowed
What does that mean?
Yeah. So effectively, when you think about how a large pharmaceutical company operates, they have a portfolio of assets that they're moving through a pipeline. And it's very expensive, very challenging R&D process where billions of dollars are spent every year kind of developing and testing and validating these assets eventually through clinical trial. And before they get to clinical trial, they have to go through lots of experiments preclinically, and really understanding for every one of those experiments, really what's the gene that they're looking to understand its involvement in a disease. And so they construct these experiments to understand that, right? What's its involvement with other proteins or pathways. And to do that, they need very specific products in those experiments that are specific to that gene, the sequence of protein that they're looking to interrogate and understand. And so the problem is there's millions and millions of these kinds of products like antibodies or other reagents, they're called, like proteins, RNAi, cell lines, a whole bunch of different tools that they can be using, and it requires so much trial and error. And it's really tough because you don't know exactly necessarily what's the right one to use in your experiment. But we've looked at the history of the use of these reagent products and got a unique view on which one's going to be the most appropriate one to test and validate. So with BenchSci, what they discovered was they can end up testing one or two of them and avoid testing the 10 or 12 that aren't going to work. And
well, what does that mean? What are some of the parameters by which these things are chosen, typically without help of BenchSci?
Yeah, so traditionally what scientists would typically do is they would look at, they use PubMed or Google to search a bunch of papers that describe types of experiments that they're looking to replicate or do. And then once they have that, they'll go to different vendor catalogs and see what, the list of products potentially they can employ to try to answer these questions. And unfortunately, that's really, really hard to do. And they spend months or even years kind of doing a lot of the trial and error around this to get the right signal and understand that, if that's appropriate or not. So as a first kind of major application of AI in this space, we took a pretty unique approach to understand how every one of those products has ever been used. And so when they're looking to replicate an experiment or take the next step, we can show them the most appropriate cell lines, or appropriate antibodies or reagents, et cetera, that have been shown to work best in the conditions that they're looking to investigate and design a more successful experiment. And that's worked really well across all of pharma for several years now, and that's led to the evolution of our AI and how we're helping them solve bigger problems now as well.
Well, what does that mean, work well? What are some of the KPIs before and after that have changed?
Yeah, I think, what's been unique is, I guess when we think about how pharma operates, and we approach this prospectively by really, if a scientist looking to build an experiment, they come to BenchSci and they find the right kind of reagent to put into it, and it ends up working really well. And we validated this with their scientists, because they were saying, well, this was great. I'd spent, 6 months or 8 months trying to test all of these different products to get the right signal. And then I went to the application and it showed me, what the needle in the stack of needles was that I should be using. And then they build that experiment and it gives them a definitive result to advance it.
Do you have any case studies of specifics?
Oh yeah,
proprietary.
Yeah, absolutely, and many of them across various pharma. We have thousands of scientists leveraging this application across 16 of the top 20 pharma, and like 4,500 academic centers all over the world, and lots of biotechs as well. And they're basically saying that is this challenge of finding the right reagent for their experiment was really tough. And now they have, a tool that they go to right away, and that basically changes the odds more in their favor. So they have the right way to get the right signal in that experiment with these tool compounds. The problem is, when you think about pharma as an organization, even understanding the volume of those products that they're purchasing is really hard, because they're buying millions and millions worth of these products every year to advance their work. So one of the first questions they asked us was, could we run the algorithm backwards and help them even understand the volume products that they're using in these applications? And when we did that, we discovered something really, really provocative, because effectively we taught the machine to understand experiments. And so we could look at their procurement history and really understand experiments like an economic unit. And what we saw was 3 patterns of experimentation that emerged out of basically every pharma that, they fall into these 3 categories of fail fast experiments, where they try something once, and if it hits the right signal, great, they continue working on it. But if it doesn't, they abandon it and never look at it again. The second pattern is, we call them kind of shotgun experiments, where they're very confident in the target that they're trying to interrogate, and they'll try many, many different types of experiments to get the right signal, to understand what it needs to do. And then the third one is where it's basically repetitive experiments, where they're completely committed to this target and will repeat the same experiment over and over again, either because it's giving them the right result, or most often than not a clear enough result. And so when we looked at this,
Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body, and yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is, there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest 1 or 2 kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order.
Start to understand pharma's portfolio in a new way. And that helped us really not just measure the impact that we were having across these organizations, which is in millions per year of cost efficiencies, but more importantly, what the scientists were saying was advancing their programs by months and even more. And so with that, we got lots of amazing examples from great scientists that have been leveraging AI in a very pragmatic way to solve a very ubiquitous problem that they're all having. And that really allowed us to expand the application of this AI, to the next more exciting steps, which were even bigger challenges that they're facing.
All right. So are you guys supplying the reagents, or are you just acting as, again, the tool that selects them with no preferred vendors?
It's that we're not providing reagents. In fact, we're just helping them find the right information that they can leverage and use the most appropriate one. So in fact, we're not monetizing based on what they procure, which lots of other solutions do. We're pretty agnostic to that, and in fact, we want them to do more with less and not have to go through much trial and error. So we're aligned with just basically ensuring that they're finding the right insight and getting the right reagent, if it comes from a vendor, if it comes from their internal teams that make them themselves, or if they have it in a fridge somewhere in their organization, they can leverage it and replicate that experiment, or not even have to, do that experiment again if they've already done it. And so that's why we're a very different kind of company as a SaaS offering, software as a service offering, where they can, come to the application at any time and ask it these kinds of questions, and they'll give it an answer without any kind of per click or per product remuneration around this stuff.
What about building a database of existing reagents and who has them, maybe to encourage sharing or to reduce the time to order?
Yeah, so it's effectively we've understood how over 70 million of all of these reagents have ever been employed in research history, and with that, curated all the specifications on where they're most likely to work and also unlikely to work. And with that, We've helped certain vendors even clean and curate their catalogs, but most importantly, help those scientists have a clear picture of what they can pick to put in their experiment, and then have the picture of what they've employed internally to help those decisions. So are things from preferred vendors, are things in inventory, do they have appropriate licenses to use, some cell lines or other things that are more controlled from a regulatory standpoint, based on their geography or use case. So we provide them with that information. So we're streamlining the workflow, but most importantly, finding the right work to do. And it began with reagents, right? Because you can imagine picking a reagent's a really important aspect of their research. But that's not the whole part of their research, because you can find the perfectly right reagent for the perfectly wrong experiment on the perfectly wrong gene or program. And that's really where we expanded the technology now to help them with those next questions of what's the best program or project that they should select based on, this understanding of biology that we've assembled. And then how do you design the best experiment to test and validate those?
You're giving them experimental design suggestions or just reagent suggestions?
Now with experimental design and beyond. So it goes well, we've taken steps beyond the selection of reagents. Effectively, what we've done is we've trained the machine to understand every experiment that we can find that's been published or exists in patents or in their own internal research history, and broke down exactly what was the gene being interrogated, what was the structure of that experiment, and what were the materials and methods and tools and techniques that were employed, and then what were the results, what was found in that experiment. And then with kind of the uniqueness of our AI, we're able to capture every one of those insights for every one of those experiments. And basically we connected them into the first kind of addressable map of biology that you can really interrogate and navigate through. So you're able to pick better projects based on the feasibility, the biology underneath them, and then test and validate those with significantly less trial and error and experimentation than normally they'd have to do.
Do you just give one suggestion, or do you give a backup if the first one doesn't work?
No, so it really we've built a bunch of applications on top of the AI to answer lots of these types of questions. The first one's kind of like we call it Navigator, which is similar to kind of a Google Maps idea, because we've effectively connected all of this evidence from every experiment that we could find. Now they can see what the likely connections of this protein to this protein to this pathway to this disease could be, and all of the evidence that supports that. And then that helps them not just understand what the underlying biology could be, but even potentially what the mechanism of action of that gene or a therapy could be. And then they're like, okay, that's a great hypothesis. How do you test that? That requires a series of experiments that we're helping them identify. So there's a lot less trial and error, and each one of those is really set up to give a definitive result, right? Because that's the thing with science, right? Like, and with most things, right? The best answer is always yes. The second best answer is always no. And the worst answer is a slow maybe. And unfortunately, those slow maybes are a consequence of lots of trial and error and testing, because you're not sure, how this fits into all the evidence. But if you have a picture of all of that evidence first, then it creates a much more empowered scientist to find the right path through that evidence, on how they can deliver an asset to better treat a disease.
Would it be a conflict for you guys to use your own software to open up your own lab and find the holes in the current experimentation, and then try things that, again, there's an existing hole, all this experimentation has been done for a certain drug, let's say, but not X, Y, or Z, and then you go do that?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and many I think there are lots of different companies that are employing AI to do that kind of work themselves and become their own biotech or pharma. I think we're taking a different approach, because kind of the goal of our company is really how do we help more medicine get to patients as effectively and quickly and successfully as possible. And to do that, we realized that to have the biggest impact, we want to help as many organizations as possible with this versus just kind of focusing on one or two programs ourselves. And so that's why we built this kind of massive map of biology to empower thousands and thousands of scientists to bring a lot more medicine at scale to patients, and hopefully kind of change the really challenging shape of the funnel that they're all dealing with. So our primary approach is, how do we catalyze as many programs as possible with as many of the leading pharma and biotechs as possible to leverage this technology successfully to have the maximum impact. And that's very different than us kind of operating as a pharma ourselves, because as you would imagine, that also can create a bit of a
it could be a conflict of interest,
and a total conflict of interest as well, right? Which is why we took this other very different approach, and we're probably one of the best examples of how you can actually democratize AI across thousands of scientists across many organizations to have a much broader impact.
But if there's a push to get a result, let's say for a terrible condition that people need solved, I mean, do you have customers that ask you, all right, where's the hole? Can you do an analysis on drugs to treat Parkinson's? Show us where the hole is, where we can go experiment and save a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And those and many other kinds of questions like that. It's part of the challenge of doing this work is just how complex biology is, and really how nebulous our understanding is of actually the mechanism of action of disease. So there's lots of examples, and we've been doing, pharma and science has been doing amazing work looking at patients that have various diseases and what are their genetics say that might be unique about them. Well, that's good because it gives you a clue on, potentially these genes are involved, but then how could they be involved is a really tough question and a lot more complicated than you might imagine, mostly because really, a lot of more prevalent diseases are not monogenic. They're not just controlled by one gene. It's many cases, it's multiple things that are going awry or operating in a slightly different way with multiple pathways and multiple genes that lead eventually to the presentation of that disease. And so, it's really hard to get a full picture of all of that biology just by reading, papers or looking at your internal results. Effectively, what we've done is saying, well, if we looked at all of that evidence all at once, and a scientist can then click through what the likely path is through this forest, where we're changing the odds for them, right? It's kind of navigating now with the GPS as opposed to just wayfinding their way through potentially quite treacherous forest.
Got a novel reagent or enzyme or something like that. Could your system suggest that it should have these functional groups, that it should maybe have this structure? Is there a like a stereochemistry component to your AI?
Yeah, for our approach is really primarily looking at this broad picture of biology first. Because, as I said, like the same way you could pick the right reagent for the perfectly wrong experiment, you can be designing molecules or approaches to target something, but the cascade of events that might happen afterwards is usually very, very complicated. And so, to help kind of demystify that approach, really, it's understanding, okay, well, here's the biology that you would then target. And then, here's the cascade of things that are going to go the way you're looking, and potentially the balance of other mechanisms that might limit the efficacy or safety of those things. And with that full picture, then they're able to effectively, design better strategies to deliver that payload and change the interaction of those proteins and pathways to better address the disease. And effectively, pharma's pretty great at designing chemistry and composition of matter to address those things. And there are other kind of AI solutions that look at small molecule design and other things that can be very specific. And that's really good. So, but there was this void really in how do you, even if you have those assets, how do you best deliver them to address the mechanisms of action of that disease? And that's really the focus of where we're trying to help these organizations with Ascend, this new version of the AI that we've launched this year.
Okay. Well, very good. Where can people go to keep tabs on the, on the software and the improvements that will be coming out, over this year and next year?
Yeah, people can go to BenchSci.com and see and learn more about how Ascend works and really what we've done and the magnitude of what we've done with this AI and also what's different about this technology. Traditionally, most of the approaches in this field that have tried to decode vast amounts of information have relied very heavily on text. So effectively what scientists have written, and we got really good at understanding what scientists wrote about. The problem is that's also can be very subjective, because scientists can be writing things, and they often do, like, this suggests this might have an impact on or an effect on this pathway, but that may be an interpretation, and often is an interpretation of actually what's in the core evidence. So what we did very differently was we trained machine first to use vision ML.
Okay. Yeah. So for people that want to follow up and see where all this is going and avail themselves of the software and updates and new stuff coming, where can they go?
Yeah, they can go to benchsci.com and learn about Ascend, this technology, and also what was different about our approach, which was less reliant on traditional text, right, or NLP, which is how many of organizations that have worked to understand mass volumes of data, and really where we focused Ascend was really primarily looking at images, right? What experiment actually happened, how was it constructed, and objectively giving them that evidence that they could then interrogate. So we talk a bit of our technology and approach on that, and again, our goal is to try to help as many organizations as possible advance as much medicine as possible. So we're happy to have those conversations and share more about what we're doing and see how we can help.
Okay, very good. Well, Luigi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Rich. Yeah. Cheers.
Magnesium is integral for 600 plus biochemical processes in the human body, and yet most people are deficient. Common signs of magnesium deficiency include fatigue, muscle weakness, stunted growth, poor immune function, poor concentration and memory, hormonal imbalances, bone and teeth problems. Most people think grabbing a bottle of whatever cheap stuff on the shelf or at the top of Amazon will solve this. The common misconception is that consuming more magnesium will automatically improve health and well-being. The truth is there are various forms of magnesium, each of which is essential for a variety of physiological processes. Most people are deficient in all forms of magnesium, while even those considered healthy typically only ingest one or two kinds. Consuming all 7 of magnesium's primary forms is the key to accessing all of its health benefits. That's why we pack 7 forms of 450 milligrams of elemental magnesium into each serving of Wild Mag Complex. 1 dose a day is all you need. Learn more and grab a bottle today at wildfoods.co. Use code GENIUS for 10% off your order.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.